So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our CEO, Dr. Sue Bruhn.
Thanks, Laurel. And thanks to all of you for calling in today. I really appreciate your time and the opportunity to connect with all of you. In forums like this, it's great to connect, and you can always reach me as well, just at sue@cmtausa.org. So feel free to reach out anytime. It's that time of year where we kind of look back over the year and think about all the things that we've achieved in our lives and at work, and at the CMTA, no different. It's been a really exciting year for us. A lot of progress on the research front. If you are signed up to get our information in the mail, this CMTA winter report should be in your mailbox next week, and there's a summary of research that really highlights all the really exciting stuff that's been going on. A lot of progress happening. And we're happy to take any questions or answer questions general about research throughout this hour. But we did announce one really significant strategic objective just a few weeks ago. And it's based on this really long-standing relationship we've had with a group of sort of the best premier clinical sites around the world called the INC, or the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium. And we've been supporting them financially and working closely with them for many years. And they've been incredibly productive. Dr. Mike Shy, who many of you may know at University of Iowa, has been the principal investigator of a grant from the NIH. And we've stepped in to make a really significant investment and commitment to the INC. We announced that just a few weeks ago. And I wanted to really have an opportunity to share with all of you a little bit more about the INC, their achievements, and why it's been so important to us at the CMTA to really make this significant investment in the INC. And so I wanted to start out with a little bit of a perspective from Dr. Shy, who's calling in from his office at University of Iowa, and just talk a little bit about all the things that the INC has done over these last 15 years of its existence. Mike?
Okay, well, thanks, Sue, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm fearful that I'm going to put you all to sleep, so I hope that that doesn't happen. And when I look now, all I see is myself and the TV screen, so I'm getting sleepy already. But I'm going to try to talk about the INC, but I just want to shout out to the CMTA initially, because the INC was part of what's called the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, which is funded by the National Institutes of Health for the last 15 years. We started in 2009, but by decree from the NIH, consortia like the INC are only allowed to be funded for 15 years. And as I'm going to try to explain why I think the INC is so important, but the reason it can continue to go forward is because the CMTA has really now fully supporting us. And again, it could not go forward without the CMTA support. So it's a heartfelt thanks from all the investigators. So what is the INC, and why is it so important? Well, the science in inherited peripheral neuropathies is really advancing, because for all of these different genes, we know the genetic cause for like 130 genes now. When the INC started, we knew the cause for about 4. And when you know the cause for a gene, then you can try to figure out a rational way to fix the problem. And that research is happening. There's models in cells, there's animal models that have been created, there's treatment approaches, which we'll talk a little bit about, that can be, and are being brought to patients now. But those can only work or be evaluated if you actually know how the different types of CMT present or progress over time. Otherwise, it's hard to tell if a treatment is really slowing progression. And I think it's not realistic to expect a pill to just instantly make CMT go away. There's going to be continued research on treatments. So it's really critical to know if your initial treatment approaches are being effective. So what does that have to do with the INC? Well, when we started in 2009, the genetic cause for about 4 or 5 genes were known, but there was nothing known about how they progressed over time, when they typically begin with showing symptoms. And basically, this is called the natural history. And in order to tell if a treatment works, you need to be able to understand the natural history of the disease. And so that's how the INC got started. We have put together a network, an international network of 20 sites where the site investigators really had a passion for caring for CMT patients, but also a passion for trying to understand the biology behind the different types of CMT and work to develop treatments for these. So since 2009 to 2024, the INC has evaluated 8,300 patients with clinical outcome assessments. And the results of this have actually enabled us to be clinical trial ready for a number of CMT subtypes, and that number is increasing. So how is this done? Patients come to the INC sites and have come to the sites over the years. And when they come there, they're evaluated by the clinical experts, and then they receive clinical outcome assessments, which we call the CMT exam score, the CMT neuropathy score, to measure as precisely as we can the presentation of their disease and how it's progressing over each visit as they come back to see us over the years. And each site has been carefully trained. They have to be certified to perform these outcome measures and record them. And all the data is housed in a central database, which is currently at the University of Cincinnati. And because of these studies, we've been able to publish in major neurology journals the natural history for CMT1A, for CMT1B, for CMTX, for CMT2A, for recessive forms of CMT, such as CMT4C, CMT4B1 and B2, and more recently for CMT SORD. And again, this work has enabled us to be clinically trial ready for many of these patients. But we recognize that sometimes we need just more sensitive outcome assessments than just those that can be obtained at the neurology exam. For the CMT subtypes, it can often be slowly progressive, such as something like CMT1A. So with the help of members in the INC, we've developed a whole set of functional outcome measures, like the CMT functional outcome measure that require patients to do tasks like walk, balance, use their hands for dexterity. We realize that ultimately we want to be able to treat children with CMT. So we've developed outcome measures for children that require functional assessments. And this is called the CMT pediatric scale. We've developed outcome measures for infants, so we can try to detect presentation and progression at the earliest age from the first year of life onward. All of those are published. All of the investigators are trained on these, and so we can get the natural history of these. We also have recognized over the years the importance of getting patient-reported information into these natural history studies. So we've developed and tested what's called the CMT Health Index for adults, which is a measure of disability from the patient's perspective. And we've taken this into children. We have a CMT Pediatric Quality of Life, where we ask children their opinions about how their CMT is progressing. And we also ask their parents, particularly for the very young patients, and what's called the parent proxy version of the Pediatric Quality of Life. So we now have the tools in place, and only because of the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium, to evaluate progression throughout the life of a patient. And with the help of our members from the University of Sydney, because the INC is truly international, this is Sydney, Australia, we've been able to put all of these outcome measures online with computerized scoring systems. So sites around the world, even outside the INC, can use these scoring outcome measures to look at progression and severity of their patients as well. Again, with the help of the CMTA, we've recognized the need to get biomarkers to look at biological markers of disease severity and expression. And so the INC has pioneered studies to identify proteins in blood, which can measure severity and progression of CMT, and which can show improvement with clinical treatments, at least in animal models so far. And we've pioneered the use of MRI, which can pick up significant changes in progression of even a slowly progressive form like CMT1A within 12 months, which will enable clinical trials to be done in a much shorter period of time. So I don't want to keep droning on this, but again, it's only because of the INC that this information is now available. And again, there's a lot to do. We have to do more natural history studies with these newer functional outcome measures, and that's only going to be possible because of CMTA support. Now, I've talked about clinical stuff from the INC, but another important feature is the genetic link, because with the INC's link to our colleagues at the University of Miami, we've been able to identify 30 novel genetic forms of CMT, 30 new genes since 2009. And because we do the clinical data, we already get natural history data on these patients when we find the gene. And an example of that is the new recessive form of CMT called CMT SORD, S-O-R-D, which turns out to be the most common recessive form of CMT. It was only being able to be diagnosed genetically because of the technology advances by Dr. Zubner and his colleagues. And because of what the cause is, which is an enzyme important in metabolizing sugars, there's already been a clinical trial for CMT SORD, even though it was just published in 2020. And the interim results look very promising for that. So this may turn out to be the first form of CMT where there's a successful treatment. So we're very excited about that. And again, the science is continuing to evolve. So we're now at clinical trial ready for many of the other subtypes of CMT, including CMT1A and many of the recessive forms of CMT, where there's gene therapy approaches that are possible, but we're set up to be able to perform these clinical trials because of the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium. And the last thing I want to mention is the INC has been really excellent in recruiting new junior investigators into the field of CMT research. We've fully funded 15 young investigators over the last 15 years, and many of those are now leaders at sites throughout the world in the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium. These young investigators are now becoming leaders in the genetics of CMT and the development of new outcome measures. And so I feel like I'm starting to drone on, and I don't want to do that, but I just want to say that because of the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium, I think clinical evaluations of patients with CMT is now organized, and data is being accrued that enables us to do clinical trials, to find new genes, train new investigators. And again, none of this would have been possible without the INC, and the INC would not be able to continue without the support from the CMTA. So I think I'll stop there and you guys can wake up now.
Thanks, Mike. That was great. And we agree and we're excited about this alignment of our mission, because we know that it's important to have both the drugs as well as the way to study the drugs in patients. And so we talk a lot about clinical trial readiness and making sure that when companies get a treatment that they're ready to test in patients, we understand how to test those in patients. That's a big part of what we do. If we take it down to kind of the individual level, what's it like? And I actually know the answer to this because I have the pleasure of visiting your clinic in Iowa. What's it like for a patient if they show up on your clinic day to be an INC patient? What's that day look like?
Okay, thanks, Sue. And it's a little different for each of the different sites within the INC. But at the heart of being an INC site is, although the research is important, the site has to have a multidisciplinary approach to treat patients with CMT, because the primary goal of the INC sites is to care for patients and make sure they're being treated to the best of their ability. So when a patient comes to the Iowa site, it's an all-day event. They come, so every Thursday, and then they come around 8 or 9 in the morning. And typically they leave around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. They will see me, and I'll perform a history and neurological exam and sort of assess their CMT and enter the clinical data into the CMT exams, or one of our outcome measures. And we see patients both with known diagnoses and patients without diagnosis of CMT. And if they have a known diagnosis, we'll make sure that they basically understand the cause of that. And if it's a known or an unknown cause, initially they'll see a genetic counselor who will review the known cause or talk about approaches for genetic testing with the unknown causes of CMT. Then they'll also see, have the opportunity to see a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, an orthotist, who will spend time with them throughout the day. Now, we don't bill for any of the research. There's a clinical fee to see me, and if the patient's going to see a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, we work through insurance, but there may be a bill for that. We have an orthotist who attends the clinic. There's no billing for that, and they look at the patient's needs for orthotics or bracing. And we've recently added a terrific young orthopedic surgeon to our clinic staff who evaluates patients' feet and ankles, makes recommendations about surgical, or if there needs to be surgical approaches. Again, there's no charge for that. That's part of a clinic visit. Then, depending upon the type of CMT a patient has, if it's a known type, we do have a number of research studies, and that might involve doing some of the outcome measures I talked about, like the functional outcome measure for adults, or the pediatric evaluations for children or infants. And those are studies that take about a half an hour or so. And if it's a known type, there will be typically biomarker samples. So we asked to get a blood draw. In some cases, we do skin biopsies because we look for gene expression in skin biopsies. And again, patients don't have to do these. So we do our best to provide good clinical care. And all the research stuff, of course, is optional for patients. At the end of the day, patients come back to see me, and I go over everything with them, and we make a plan going forward. And if we don't know the gene, there's typically a plan to go through and arrange a genetic testing. Typically, we'll start with it's an unknown cause. We'd start with commercial labs, and our genetic counselors are really trained to keep costs at a minimum for patients with this. Excuse me. And then we also will often, if we don't have a cause, we will take blood for research testing and work with Stefan Zucker and his colleagues to identify novel gene expressions or modifier genes. So, I mean, I guess that's sort of a quick run through.
It's a very integrated and very comprehensive approach, which I think is great. So good to hear about all that. Thanks for Thanks for sharing that. I guess one other question I had for you is, how are you feeling about clinical trials and what do you see on the horizon for the CMT community? It seems like it's an exciting time, but it would be good to get your perspective about, kind of what's coming up for treatments.
No, I'm happy to give that because that was our dream when we started the INC back in 2009, and there was really nothing on the horizon that we thought was really likely to be helpful. And now we're entering really, I think, the era of clinical trials for CMT. So I mentioned the CMT SWORD trial, which is already underway. There have been some other trials for CMT1A. Personally, I think the most exciting trials for CMT1A are the approaches that decrease the expression of the PMP22 gene, because CMT1A is caused by an extra copy of that gene, which makes too much of the protein. And so there are technologies now called RNA interference or even antisense oligonucleotides, which can decrease the amount of PMP22. And my belief is that within the next year, some of those clinical trials will begin. For some of the autosomal recessive, which means you need to have 2 copies of a gene to have the CMT. Some of those types clinical trials are already getting underway. There's a CMT4J study that's under the direction of the Alpida company out in California, which just got FDA approval to develop a gene replacement gene therapy study for that type. And by Cleopas Cleopa and his colleagues in Cyprus are moving towards having gene replacement clinical trials for CMT 4C and perhaps even a CMTX. And I just think that there's going to be more and more clinical trials that I think are scientifically sound that really have the potential to help people, so that are rational. So I think we're really beginning to enter that era.
Thanks, Mike. That's really helpful. Katherine?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question, Mike, if I may. I know because CMT being a multi-generational disease, there's many on the call who'll have children with CMT, and you mentioned it briefly. I just wondered around number of you have children in the database, and what have you learned about CMT in kids, and is there anything interesting in that regard you could share with us?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And again, if you focus me if I'm wandering around too much. But within the INC, we follow almost 2,000 children. And most of that data right now is on children between the ages of 4 and 20. We're beginning to accrue data on children under the age of 4 and have about 60 or 70 patients that we follow there. And our impression is that many of the classic forms of CMT, like CMT1A, or CMTX, for example, the symptoms really progress, begin in childhood. And my kids will be sort of clumsy at school, slow runners, have problems with balance before really signs of ankle weakness or things like that begin to occur. And ultimately, we believe that treating children will be the best way to have successful treatments going forward. But we have to be careful with this because CMT1A, for example, and CMTX don't shorten a person's life. And we have to make sure that treatments are safe, because we would just never forgive ourselves if we treated kids with something that caused a bad disease as a side effect. And so I think for most types of CMT, the more common forms at least, clinical trials will probably start in adults, even though ultimately we'll want to get these treatments to kids. So we're working hard to look at the natural history of children, even infants with CMT, to see when they signs first present, and then when's the peak of their progression, when are they progressing the fastest, so we would know when we'd have the best effect. Now, Another point here, though, is that not all forms of CMT are slowly progressive, and sort of that impression, I think, gets colored a little bit because of the fact that CMT1A and CMTX are the most common forms. So a lot of the patients will say, have those. But many forms of CMT, particularly the autosomal recessive forms, and some of the cases of CMT1B, CMT1E, as it goes, CMT2A, really hits young children severely and progress in the first decade of life severely. And so for those, we need to really, going forward, this is one of the challenges for the INC, is to get that natural history data so we can really defend trying to bring treatments as early as possible into that patient population. So I think, again, I'm not sure I'm being too organized here, but that's one of the real things we want to accomplish in the next 5-year cycle with the INC. So children and how they progress is like just an essential part of what we need more natural history and clinical trial readiness data going forward.
Absolutely. And yeah, you've explained that really nicely. Thank you, Mike. It's useful for all of us with children with CMT to know that they're included and monitored and followed up. So yeah, thank you for all of the work that the sites do to do that.
So I wanted to just jump in and talk a little bit about kind of why we went ahead and did this. It was great to have Mike talk a little bit about the achievements of the INC. And, you know, when we heard that the funding from the NIH was sunsetting, and because we've had this really close working relationship with the INC and been partnered with them for many years, we really felt it was important to preserve the data of 8,500 patients over 15 years and all that data can provide, and the sites and all the work that's going on, because we really do believe fundamentally that's as important as having the drug as understanding how to study the drug. And so we've been working really closely with the INC to transition the support from the INC over to the CMTA because it's so mission aligned, and because really a lot of what we do with the CMTA is just trying to connect people and resources to each other to accelerate drug development. And that's really what makes it happen. Drug development is a long, slow, complicated process, and it takes support from researchers and clinical investigators and drug development companies, and last but not least, the patient community, really all working together. And so we're always looking for ways of making that connection. And so this data, which is a huge data set, is a treasure trove of information that helps drug development for when companies come and they say, I want to start a clinical trial for a drug in patients that look like whatever they want to study. What does that data look like from a natural history perspective? How many patients are out there like that? And so all of that is part of accelerating our ability to get drugs onto the market ultimately with the support of the patient community. So making sure that data was preserved, and then ultimately going forward, making sure that it's enhanced and then expanded so that it becomes really the core database that drug companies can use to help. And our goal here is to make that data available to anybody who wants to use it, see it, access it. So this is not about holding on to it. It's about making sure that it's supported so that anybody who wants to look at it, interrogate it for any purpose that's related to CMT drug development, we're there to support it. So it's always been a multidisciplinary, cross-functional sort of effort, and we wanted to make sure that all of that was supported going forward. And so that's really why we went ahead and did that. So we're really excited about it. It's a big strategic move from our perspective, but we feel like it's going to make a huge difference in terms of accelerating the pathway to a cure. Laurel, do you want to open it up? Is any questions in the chat you want to?
Yes, we have a couple great questions coming in. The first question, Dr. Shai, is for you. One of our attendees asked, will Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinics be involved with these programs? I think he's referring to INC.
So they're not, neither is, they both have fine neurologists there, but neither is a part of the INC.
Okay. Then the next question, also, we've received wonderful accolades about people who have visited your clinic and have had a fantastic experience. Another question came in, please provide any thoughts on vitamin B1 influence on preventing myelin sheath degradation and adequate daily dose as a preventive measure.
So there's been efforts over this 15 years to look at anything that, there's data for that could improve myelination as we look for to develop clinical trials. And all of that has proved negative. So there's no vitamin, there's no supplement that will make the CMT go away for any of the known genotypes, with the exception of a very rare form, which responds to riboflavin, which is it has an eponym, and I can't remember the off the top of my head, but that's an extremely rare form. Otherwise, the best advice on diet is a balanced diet, watching weight, and having an appropriate exercise program.
Thank you. The next question, Katherine, I don't know if we're circling back to this later, is how does one sign up for clinical trials?
It's a perfect chance to chat about it, Laurel. Thanks. I saw that question come in. There's lots of different ways that our community members can get involved in CMT research, and clinical trials are part of that. Because we exist at the CMTA to help connect our community with those opportunities, we developed a platform called Patients as Partners in Research, and that was launched back in 2018. It's really the best place to start. We'll pop a link in the chat to the Patients as Partners in Research webpage on our site, which has got all of the information. But what you'll find there is a list of more than 20 open and actively recruiting research opportunities, and they cover a whole range, every type of CMT, and even for those people who don't know what CMT subtype they have an opportunity to get involved as well. And these go all the way through from surveys and interviews to natural history studies, which Mike was talking about, that track your CMT over time and help us understand it better and have that important preparation for clinical trials. And then we also have clinical trials listed there that are testing these new therapeutics. And we're actually going to be adding the details of a new clinical trial for people with type 1 and type 2 CMT in the next few days. So it's like, watch this space, because this page is updated really regularly as new trials become available. We work actively with the companies running those trials, and we support the recruitment of those trials by providing the information and signposting to the correct trial recruitment pages. So it's really a nice one-stop shop for all of the different trials that are happening in CMT. What's really amazing about Patients as Partners in Research is we've got over 7,000 members of the CMT community who filled in a Patients as Partners profile for us. So we know a bit about their CMT, and then we can appropriately direct them. So if a clinical trial starts in their subtype, we can reach out and tell them about it. So anybody on this call today can go to that site, they can build themselves a profile. We'll pop a link in the chat straight to the profile builder. And I also just kind of wanted to add a personal note, because Mike's been talking about what happens at Centers of Excellence and these research studies. Some of the people on the call might know as well as being Chief Research Officer here, I'm also a CMT patient. There's 4 generations of CMT in my family. And a year ago, I signed myself and my 9-year-old son Samson up to the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium's natural history studies for adults and children. And we go to the INC site in London. It's a CMTA Centre of Excellence, and we spend a good half a day with the team, filling in surveys, doing assessments. We complete some physical tasks and examinations that Mike mentioned. And if anyone's wondering what they are, they mostly involve walking around, standing on one leg, turning over some coloured wooden pegs, standing up and sitting down, and sometimes they use a stopwatch on us to see how we're doing. None of them hurt, and my 9-year-old actually finds them really quite fun. He likes the 6-minute walk test up and down the track, and we committed to doing that once a year. We usually make a nice little trip out of it and see a little bit of London while we're down there, and it's super interesting. I mean, I know I'm a scientist, so I find these things interesting, but it is, and you really feel like somebody's looking at you and your CMT. They want to understand it better. I learn a lot about my CMT and how it's progressing, but I also know that it really helps research. And I think that's what all these trials, studies, and surveys do. It's just a little thing that we can do to help CMT research come along. So that's where our clinical trials get listed on that site. And it really opens the door when you're in a natural history study. You find out about the trials and work in partnership with the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium and the other CMTA Centre of Excellence sites.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Catherine.
Catherine.
That's helpful. And I feel like, it's important to just, if you can, fill out this patients as partners and research profile, because this is a way that we can communicate with you for any opportunities that are coming up. And then I see some questions around, if you want to go to an INC site, how would you go about doing that, Mike? Do folks reach out to one of the 20 sites directly?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to follow up on what Katherine said and emphasize that as we try to get treatments for CMT, that we recognize this is a partnership. So it's not like the experts, talking down to the patients, if I can say it that way. It really is a partnership of equals to try to really work with the patients who come through to try to really get clinical trial ready and bring rational treatments to patients. And so we couldn't do what we do without the patients with CMT. And so again, I thank everybody who comes to see us. So to answer your question, so people reach out to us. Most of our, or at least, I think most of our patients aren't referred by somebody else. They just reach out to us through our clinic line or through our office to our research coordinator, and we schedule patients. And I think most of this the INC sites are like that. They have a contact information that patients can reach out to if they're in the area. It's an international network of sites, but they're spread throughout the United States and in the UK and in Italy and also in Australia. And I don't have a list right in front of me here, but I think you can find the sites at the CMTA. And when you come in to see us at any of these clinics, unless you really don't want to be part of research, you're instantly part of it and part of the partnership, because just by being examined, you're become part of the natural history study, which is how we look to see how different types of CMT progress, or if you on gene identification to help us understand how that particular gene presents itself, even if it's what we find going forward in the future. So that's part of the research right away. So
Thanks, Dr. Shai. We also included the Center of Excellence listing in the chat. Thanks to Sarah Gentry for including our patients as partner listing opportunities, as well as the form to fill out so that you have your own patients as partner in research profile. And then on the Centers of Excellence listing, I mean, there are close to 60 CMTA Centers of Excellence, and you should see about 20 of them marked with an asterisk indicating those are the INC Centers of Excellence, INC Associated Centers of Excellence. We've had another question come in, speaking of multi-generational, and this person asks, is it common to have different clinical presentation with MPZ mutations between a child having an earlier infant onset or a parent having a later adult onset, just that discrepancy between severity and onset?
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about myelin protein 0 mutations, because they're sort of a unique group that, so myelin protein 0 or MPZ is the most abundant protein in the myelin sheath that goes around peripheral nerves. And there's over 200 different mutations in the myelin protein 0 gene that can cause CMT. For reasons that aren't completely understood, there is one group of these mutations, roughly half of them, which affect children even severely in infancy and early childhood, so that kids may need even wheelchairs before they reach the age of 20. But there's another group of mutations in the same gene that don't seem to damage the myelin at all and look clinically like CMT type 2 in adults. And these symptoms typically don't present until the patient's 40 years of age or older. And why this is not understood, because the gene and the protein are only in myelin. They're not in the nerve fiber itself. So why this other group presents this way is actually a sort of a clinical mystery that's under investigation. But in most cases, the particular mutation or variant that you have in NPZ predicts whether you'll have the early onset or the later onset. And in my experience, for the vast majority of cases, that rings true. So if you have an early onset, you have kids, they'll likely have an early onset. If you have a later onset, they'll likely have a later onset. There are a couple examples where that doesn't hold true. I think it's just for a couple of mutations, to the best of my knowledge. But in most cases, if you have an early onset, your children are affected, they would have an early onset. And if you have a late onset, if your children are affected, they have a late onset. And again, this is an autosomal dominant condition. So your kids would have a 50% chance of inheriting it from you.
Thank you, Dr. Shai. Moving on with the questions. Next one. Are you aware of any connection between CMT and burning mouth syndrome?
So not per se, but I diagnose CMT sort of loosely. In other words, any patient who has a peripheral neuropathy with a genetic basis, I consider as a type of CMT. And there are some forms of CMT, particularly those which are caused by mutations in some what are called sodium channels, which can give very painful burning symptoms as part of their neuropathy. But it's not just limited to burning mouth. So.
Let's see. We have a really long question. I think it's a personal medical question, so we might have to get back to that offline. And then I have had a couple questions come in, Dr. Shai. One of them is, what can we do as patients right now to support the advancement of research? And I know we've touched on this in terms of filling out patients as partners, but what do you say when people come to the clinic and ask you, what can I be doing right now? What is your best answer?
Well, I get asked that quite a bit. And my first answer is that you're already doing a lot by just coming to the clinic, because you're helping people all over the world with your type of CMT by providing this natural history data that we use to find the progression and get clinical trial ready. So that's not an insignificant contribution. The second way is that organizations like the CMTA are essential to us keeping going, and they need to raise funds. So if you're in a situation where you can contribute to the CMTA, I mean, that is a huge deal as well. And then, unfortunately, things are very tight at the NIH at the moment, because funding levels are down. So to get an NIH grant now, you have to be in the 8th percentile to get that funded. So that means 92% of the grants that come to the NIH don't get funded. Only 8% do, and there's not very many for CMT. So writing your congressman about the importance of research related to CMT is important, because people tend to respond to pressure. So I think that's an important thing to do. But, again, just by participating in or being evaluated at a site within the INC or even CMT centers of excellence is a help to all of us.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question, and someone asked, if they've been to see you once, when should they schedule that second visit or any follow-ups?
So typically, we like to see patients on an annual visit, although many of our patients come from out of town, and that's makes it a challenge for many of them. Although I have to say we're very proud because 2 weeks ago we got a patient from Wyoming who made that's the 50th state. So we've had patients from all 50 states come to our.
Oh,
So we're excited about that.
that is great.
26 countries, but again, so when it's possible for follow-up visits from our side, research side, that's important. But things change for patients, and when they feel that there's issues that want to be seen, they just need to reach out to our clinic coordinator. Email is the easiest way, and then to get a patient scheduled. And it's probably similar for the other sites within the INC.
Okay, so
Hey,
looking
Laurel,
for
I see we've talked a little bit about all 20 INC sites are also centers of excellence. And so we talked a lot about an INC site, which is a research site, which you could be part of this research protocol. But I think our centers of excellence is one of the coolest things that we do, really important things that we do. Can you touch a little bit on what does it mean to be a center of excellence? What are the requirements for that? So setting aside just the participation in the INC, what does it take to be a center of excellence for the CMTA?
Absolutely. So our review board, our distinguished review board is looking for those neuromuscular specialists who have fellowship training in neuromuscular diseases, and they're looking for that clinical director to have a multidisciplinary clinic, so that when the patient goes in, that patient experience is not just seeing the neurologist, but seeing a couple other therapists, whether it's PT, OT, offering genetic counseling, like Dr. Shai mentioned. And then we want them, of course, to be involved in peripheral nerve study. So being, hopefully being members of and attending the Peripheral Nerve Society annual meetings and participating in that level of continuing education. And they have to have a significant patient base, CMT patient base. So they have to have experience with CMT patients. So when they apply to receive that distinction, those are some of the markers that our review board is absolutely looking for. And I think something that causes a little bit of confusion, the CMTA does not run these centers of excellence. They're run by the clinical directors. So they do all look differently. They don't all have the same exact multidisciplinary clinic. So it might look a little bit different. And the other thing that I think people don't understand is that the distinction is awarded to the neurologist and not the institution or the hospital. So if that neurologist leaves Wayne State and goes to Iowa, that distinction goes with them. And so then whoever's coming into, say, Wayne State, for example, would need to apply and meet that same criteria to receive that distinction. So it's really growing fast. Since 2018. The Center of Excellence network has grown 50%, which is really exciting and continues to grow. We received another application this morning. So I think there are a lot of neuromuscular specialists who want to be more involved and to support and care for CMT patients. Yeah.
Thanks,
There's a
Laurel.
lovely thing we do at the CMTA as well, Laurel didn't mention it, is we get our Center of Excellence clinic directors together once a year, and we share with them updated information on CMT, what the CMTA can offer everybody. So we offer a network for those clinic directors to really help them learn about CMT, the latest developments in CMT. They have their clinical perspective, but we're able to share a kind of more global perspective as to what's happening with CMT. And we'll have specialists like Mike come in and talk at those meetings. And if there's any like really hot updates in research, to just bring that to their attention, because lots of these clinic directors don't just do CMT, they'll do all of the other neuromuscular diseases as well. So we take that opportunity to really blow the trumpet for everything that's happening in CMT. Laurel,
oh, go ahead.
So there was a lovely question in the chat about people offering up their bodies, which I'm happy to answer.
Go ahead,
Do you
Katherine.
want? Okay, so one of the questions from Bruce was, is there a mechanism through which we as patients can offer up our bodies for training of medical students and future neurologists, like a classroom show and tell so they can see CMT in real patients? It made me smile because I've done this. So wherever you are in the world, if you have a hospital near you that trains medical students, they usually will have sort of patient days and training days and assessment days. And the trick is to contact your local medical school and say, do you need patient volunteers? And you get signed up on a list, and then they'll contact you and say, we're having a assessment day or a training day, and you go along as a volunteer. But that's going to differ depending on your local hospital and how they train their medical students. But quite often you can go in and volunteer, and they have to try and work out what's wrong with you, which I think is quite fun.
Sounds like a fun game. I have another question for Dr. Shai, and this comes up in the community all the time, Dr. Shai. I'm sure you received this in the clinic. And it's about the role of stress in CMT and how to combat fatigue, or is fatigue simply a constant battle that most of us will be facing?
Well, can I answer yes to all of the above?
Yes.
First of all, if you have problems with balance, and if you have a foot drop, and you have maybe difficulty doing things with your hands, it's sort of a constant struggle throughout the day. And I think that's particularly true for balance, because if you have balance affected by the CMT, that's because of what we call proprioception problems, where your brain doesn't really sense where your feet are in space. So you have to use your eyes to overcome this all the time. So you actually always have to concentrate. You can't just take it easy when you're in your daily activities. So I think that builds up, and I think that leads to a fatigue just by itself. And then secondly, a number of patients with CMT have sleep apnea, and yet that can affect sleep and rest at night. So we have a lot of patients who are on BiPAP machines, for example, to help with that. And then the stress of having CMT and worrying about how it's going to progress, and are you going to be able to do this or that 5 or 10 years down the road, it is, that takes it out of a person. And then, of course, people with CMT aren't immune to the things that cause stress in people who don't have CMT. And so all of that adds up. So, I mean, I think those are issues to deal with. And again, sort of by making sure that you're, this isn't going to deal with all of it, but making sure that you have your ambulation aids as helpful as possible. Having a sense of what your needs are going to be for the future, which typically are just more ankle support and maybe more hand support. Just having a better idea of the natural history of the CMT type you have, all of that is helpful. And then just, I think I can't answer it more specifically than that.
Can I add to that just slightly from a community perspective and things I've heard of when I've been talking to CMT community members about what's made a difference for them? I mean, Mike touched briefly on nutrition and exercise. And it's the least kind of sexy answer because we're all hoping there's going to be a treatment, but actually that is a first wave treatment for CMT. And can really make a difference to people's mood in terms of the stress and their fatigue and energy levels. But it's just about finding an exercise program that works for you and easing into it gently, preferably with the support of a physio who understands your condition. But that can really help boost energy levels and reaching out for those aids. If you're starting to feel more tired just walking around, think about your ankle supports and your AFOs, because I've listened to people and that's been transformative for them in just managing their energy, and they're feeling at the end of the day, oh, I've actually got more energy because I've moved to use some of those tools that are available for me. So start exploring the tools and think about incorporating some exercise into your daily routine because it massively improves balance. We've got some great studies that show balance is improved. That's just not my view. Balance is improved, and when you improve those things, your fatigue reduces.
Mhm.
I agree with that completely, Catherine. I think that's really important. And I would say that a couple of activities that people really seem to benefit from are yoga, recognizing that you can't do all the movements, but the stretching I think is really important. And also Tai Chi is another one. But I think working with, hopefully with a physical therapist, somebody to provide some guidance. And that because becoming a couch potato is really counterproductive, both for mood and for ability to be active.
Laurel, maybe we can squeak in one last question in our last couple minutes.
Yes, absolutely. So somebody asked, they're seen at an MDA clinic that is not a center of excellence. Could that MDA clinic be involved in the Center of Excellence network? Dr. Shai, do you want to grab that?
So say, first of all, they could be involved in the Center of Excellence network if they have the appropriate expertise, which they probably do, but they have to request it. And the MDA is great, and they also help support the INC, which we're very grateful for. But the MDA sites that are not part of the INC don't contribute to the specific research studies we've been talking about.
Excellent, thank you. We've had a couple last minute questions come in, and will grab those from the chat. You're welcome to reach out to me and we will try to get those answered offline, but out of respect for Dr. Shai and everyone's time, we are going to wrap up the meeting because I know he has other appointments today and I'm sure you all do too. But I want to thank you all for joining us for our last Lunch and Learn of the year. Please stay tuned. In the new year as we announce our education lineup, and it's just an honor to have you all with us and part of our community. Dr. Shai, truly a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your time and of course your talents with us and the tremendous support you give to the CMT community and their families.
Well, it goes both ways. So thank you to all of you for your partnership with us.
Thanks everyone. Sue or Catherine, any parting words?
I would also say thanks to everyone on the call and to the community, because that's the power behind everything that we do. That's what accelerates drug development, is working together to find ways to, get products across the finish line as quickly as we can. And I look forward to continuing to partner with the community as we move forward. We got an exciting year ahead in 2024. Lots more research progress coming up. So thank you all very much.
Absolutely. We cannot advance research without the participation of the CMT community. So everyone who's joined today, you're finding out more, join in, come with us on the journey, help the CMTA to progress all of the research studies in whichever way you can. We're really grateful for that. And we're looking forward to the first approvals of CMT treatments, and we're all just pushing towards that together. So thank you.
Thanks
Happy
everyone.
holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.